Today on the list, the standout stars of country music. Say goodbye to Tupperware and
This is good stuff.
how to make the best homemade salsa.
I like to roast my chilies and, the tomatillos. It gives it that smoky flavor.
But up first,
If you want to be in the club, then you have to wear a bra.
You think you need one?
Judy Blume's groundbreaking novel is finally on the big screen. It's your life, it's your list, and it starts right now.
Hey everyone, I'm Jimmy Rhodes.
And I'm Christina Guerrero, and just in time for Mother's Day, a classic book that many of us grew up with is now a movie.
That's right. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret is a story about a preteen girl growing up in the 70s.
Yeah, it's one of author Judy Blume's most influential works. Now it's a movie that highlights women's lives in all the different stages. And that's our featured story at the top of the list.
If you want to be in the club, then you have to wear a bra.
Oh. You think you need one?
In the film Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, an 11-year-old struggles with issues like boys and bras.
We must increase our cost!
Abby Ryder Fortson plays the part of Margaret. Rachel McAdams is her mom, and Kathy Bates is her grandma. This movie covers the many struggles of different generations. Judy Blume wrote the famous book this film's based on.
It was my truth. I wanted to be honest. It was my honesty of what it was like to be in 6th grade.
When it came out 50 years ago, she touched on taboo topics like menstruation.
It's miserable while you're going through it, but you can look back on it later and hopefully laugh.
The film also covers issues moms face. Rachel balanced having small kids at home in real life while filming this movie.
I had a newborn at the time and a 3-year-old at home.
That was hard.
Trying to find that work-life balance, navigate your way through intense mom guilt.
She put that real-life stress on screen.
So it was a really cathartic experience and made my job easier that I didn't have to reach too far for it.
Margaret's parents come from different religions. Kathy plays her Jewish grandmother who struggles with finding her role in the world as she ages, a challenge she's faced in real life too.
There are times when you think, girl, I don't know how much longer you can keep this up. And so I am so grateful to feel like I used to when I started out in this business.
You would think that teens in the 70s were much different than today, but the film shows that's not necessarily true.
I think that the core experience of being an awkward, messy teenager who's just going through it, that really hasn't changed.
Director Kelly Freeman Craig says she did research comparing today's girls to a few decades ago.
Right before I made the film, I sat down with a bunch of 12-year-old girls to interview them because I was wondering what are the differences, and what I found was actually hardly anything has changed.
And finally, no matter your age, this film shows you're not alone.
I hope it also makes the whole experience of adolescence feel less awkward and embarrassing just because you know this is something we all go through.
It's the good stuff.
Yeah.
The good stuff is great, and the terrible stuff is life and death.
It's a great story later.
Yeah. It's a great story later, yeah, exactly.
Judy hopes the film helps you feel more connected to other women.
And they'll laugh and they'll cry, and I hope that people are pleased and moved by it.
A heartfelt story spanning different generations is at the top of the list.
Salsa is America's #1 condiment, and the more ways you experience the freshness and versatility of this dip/topping/ingredient, the more you understand why. May is National Salsa Month, so we have tips to help you make your salsa chip-worthy.
Ah, salsa, the trusty wingman that turns a dry little tortilla chip into a force of culinary nature. You've had it in restaurants and maybe even made your own, but how much do you really know about America's #1 condiment?
The chilies have evolved quite a bit in just a short time. I mean, there's hybrids now that people make, and you can come up with different flavors. There's just so many possibilities.
For some expert tips on how to take your salsa from so-so to sabroso, we went to the owner of Los Muertos Salsa in Phoenix, Arizona, Anthony Perez. For starters, use fresh, roasted, and boiled ingredients.
The way I make my salsa, I use fresh and roasted and cooked ingredients. Pico de gallo, for instance.
Fresh, raw ingredients keep the taste and flavors up front and in your face.
That's amazing. It's bright and it's fresh. It's a delight. Do you use ever a combination of roasted with fresh with boiled or anything else?
I like to roast my chilies and, the tomatillos. It gives it that smoky flavor. It brings out a lot more flavor in your salsa.
What does the boiling do to it?
It just softens up your vegetables a little more. So like you can blend it in the blender and it's not as chunky.
And this kind of has more of that like saucy feel. This is good stuff. Oh yeah.
Next up, the equipment.
This is like the OG food processor here, molcajete. So you can make salsa, you can grind spices. You don't get as much of a fine grind on it, but you add everything in there, your chilies, your tomatoes, your onions, your spices. The consistency is a little thicker.
For more control over the consistency, Anthony uses either a blender or food processor.
Depending on how you add your ingredients, you can say add your tomatoes first, depending on how chunky you like it, then add your chilies later. So it's not as chopped up.
And if you toss everything in and just turn it on,
you're gonna end up with a sauce instead of a salsa.
For even more precise control of the consistency,
most people don't have an immersion blender this big, but most people have a small immersion blender. You can use that to chop your ingredients and control it a little more with this in a blender.
Finally, experiment with special ingredients.
One of my big things is I like to use balsamic vinegar in salsa.
I never would have thought of that as a salsa ingredient.
A lot of people use the little red wine or apple cider vinegar. I like the balsamic. It gives it a little richness, but it also helps preserve your salsa a little longer, just because of the acidity.
He also likes to use cumin in his red salsas.
A little bit will go a long way. It gives it another different level of flavor.
And what is this ingredient?
So this is Mexican oregano. It gives it almost like a sweetness. It's a whole different taste than Italian oregano. That's the thing is spices make a huge difference on how you make your salsa.
We're making your salsa sensational.
Digital games might very well be one of our favorite pastimes. From the big name game consoles to our smartphones, you can download them instantly and play them from anywhere. But there are upsides to the old school versions. Zach Perry compares physical versus digital video games.
Back in the day, the only way to play a video game was using physical cartridges or discs. These days, it's all about the download. While convenient, there are many issues.
The main difference between a physical and a digital game is ownership. Digital game, you don't really own that. You're being given a license to play it whenever you want, but there's no guarantee that that's always going to be there.
Josh Fairhurst, CEO of Limited Run Games, a video game publishing company, has some pros and cons of buying only digital games. We'll start with the movement to digital.
We're actually seeing like a shift in consumer preference towards digital, so the publishers are just saying it's not really worth it to go physical anymore.
This is mainly because of the file size. The new Star Wars Jedi Survivor game from Electronic Arts is 148 gigabytes, too big for one disc. Plus, it gives the manufacturer an edge in getting games to market.
If you want to ship a physical game, you have to get it approved with the platform holder like 2 months in advance of launch. If you only go digital, you can get approved by the platform holder like a week before your launch date.
And it's not just size, it's server cost. EA is getting ready to pull the plug on the digital version of Battlefield 1943.
The minute that these server costs exceed the profit that's coming in, the publishers or developers will rip them down, and then you can never play that game again.
Unless a publisher like Limited Run comes along and offers a physical version, which is next on our list.
Our main focus and goal is to always take these digital games that are not available physically and make them physical. We don't need to be there when a game launches, right? Like, we can come through 2 or 3 years later, like Doom Eternal. When that came out on Switch, there was no physical launch.
Limited Run isn't alone. There's companies like Super Rare Games and Nicholas as well.
There are hundreds of games being released every week that are digital only. It's wonderful that there's more people providing more options and more content.
We'll wrap with Josh's buying advice. He says physical is the gold standard.
From a value perspective, If you buy a digital game, you can never resell that. But if you buy the game physical, that standalone game is always going to have some value. And in some cases, it can appreciate wildly.
Josh points out that what's new today will be considered retro in just a few years, and that may equate to value.
You never know what these things could go on to be worth. They could be a gold mine. So it's like, if you have the option between buying physically and buying digitally, you might as well buy physically.
You can learn more at limitedrungames.com. From convenience to preservation, that's physical versus digital video games.
Still to come on the list, the one question that's always asked in a job interview.
It would be a good idea to give it some thought and map it out in your head before it happens.
Plus, how artificial intelligence created a custom beer recipe.
That's when it spit out AIPA.
And the duo breaking ground at this year's ACM Awards.
Their music encompasses all of those Southern sounds we love: gospel, rock, and soul.
All that and more ahead on the list.
Friends, welcome back. You know, college seniors all over the country will be graduating this May and ready to join the workforce.
My son among them, and as stressful as school and finals have been, it's a whole different kind of anxiety when it comes time to apply for that first job.
Oh, absolutely. But guys, this is no time to panic. Jackie Danker has tips on how to interview like a pro your first time and every time.
Nail-biting, nerve-wracking, blood-curdling. No, it's not a horror film. It's your first conversation with a potential employer.
Nothing is more convincing than conviction. And the more conviction you have around yourself being a good fit for the job, the more that's going to come through.
If you want to project the kind of confidence that can help you ace every job interview, Jeff Cochran from Shapiro Negotiations Institute has some tips. For starters, research, research, research.
Your greatest negotiation power is understanding the precedents. What do they pay other folks? What does the industry pay?
He says to know their philosophy around compensation.
Do they believe compensation is a tool to bring out the best in folks? Or do they believe that compensation is secondary to some of the other things that they might offer?
He says to see if there's any annual report on the company and check online company review sites like Glassdoor.
Well, number one reason people leave a job is dissatisfaction with their mission or dissatisfaction with the people with whom they work.
Next, prepare for the typical questions.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Even though you may be able to answer that spontaneously,
it would be a good idea to give it some thought and map it out in your head before it happens.
Other questions are,
how do you envision your first 90 days at our company? Sometimes they'll ask things like, what have you done to prepare for this interview?
To help with this, he says,
come up with a systematic approach for answering the question. For instance, repeat and clarify. Make sure you understood the question.
And
come back and ask, did that answer your question?
Finally, have questions of your own.
They're going to finish every single interaction with, well, do you have any questions for us? The insightfulness of your question speaks volumes.
Some of his favorites are,
how do you think that this position is going to change over the course of the next 5 years? What do you think the opportunities for advancement are? If I brought one skill to your company, what would you hope that it would be?
The key to asking questions is
your ability to listen to what they say and ask questions based on what you've heard.
Now we know how to be the person they have to hire.
From bistros to wine bars, there are all kinds of places to gather that offer an energetic vibe, including some craft breweries getting love on TikTok. Teresa Strasser found a few that are keeping things interesting with their creative approach. Hey, Teresa.
Thank you. With more than 580,000 likes combined, these breweries are making the workplace fun and showing us the inside workings of a brewery. Coming in at number 1, Night Shift Brewing.
Artificial intelligence picked a hazy IPA for us to brew and came up with a pretty awesome recipe that we followed. AIPA.
They're a local brewery in Boston, Massachusetts, started by a trio of roommates who originally just made beer for their friends and family.
Around 2011, we finally decided we wanted to take this awesome night shift hobby and turn it into something more than that.
And now, along with trying trends on the internet like their AI beer, they're sharing the fun journey of what running a brewing company looks like. It's like we're there. At number 2, Tailgate Brewery.
And I can do all things. I can do all things. I can do all things. Yeah. I'm not afraid of the moment.
This is an independent Tennessee craft brewery and pizzeria with 5 different locations. On their account, they share some things that make their operation a bit different.
So here at Tailgate, we've got a little fill tech. What it does, it x-rays the very, very top part. When it notices that the fill length is not quite where it needs to be, it'll kick it out.
And give you tips you didn't know you needed.
If you see any bubbles like clinging to the side of your glass, that's a dirty glass and you definitely don't want to drink that beer.
Okay, gross, and also good to know. And last on our list of breweries on TikTok, Flick's Brewhouse Des Moines. Flick's Brewhouse has many locations all over the U.S., but the Des Moines location caught our attention with their funny TikToks.
Popular, you're gonna be popular.
This brewery is also making some pretty interesting beers. Yeah, good thing that's only a 10-second TikTok because I had to watch it a dozen times. Make that a baker's dozen? And those were some fun breweries on TikTok showing us that beer is their love language. More to come on the list. Stay with us.
Friends, we are back, and on today's watch list, we are counting down to the 58th Annual Academy of Country Music Awards. From the performers to the nominees, we have an inside look at some of the standout stars to watch for on tomorrow's big show.
The stage is set for country music's Party of the Year.
Oh my gosh.
So grateful. Let's go!
Luke Combs, Jason Aldean, and Kane Brown are among this year's performers, with Dolly Parton and Garth Brooks set to host.
You never know what you're going to get with Dolly and Garth Brooks. They're throwing everything out of the window. It's going to be very fun to see.
There are a lot of surprises in store tomorrow on Prime Video. And country music industry expert and producer Gabe Lenners highlights a few of this year's standout nominees. First up, this year's most nominated artist, Hardy.
Happy's always by your side, never not willing to provide, but
I think Hardy's trajectory is going in such a unique direction when it comes to country music. He straddles this line between country and rock, and he brings his A game with every single song he puts out.
Why can't everybody just be you?
He's racked up 7 nominations and shares 3 of those with our next standout star, Lainey Wilson.
I don't know if he's an angel.
Nods they earned for their collaborative ballad titled Wait in the Truck.
She is down home, humble, she just has a great personality. She is the most nominated female artist for this year's ACMs.
Moving on to Miranda Lambert.
If I was a cowboy, I'd be wild and free.
She's nominated this year for the 17th time in that Female Artist of the Year category,
which breaks a record previously held by Reba McEntire for most nods in that category.
She's raw and authentic, and her sound really truly stands the test of time with anything she does.
We wrap it up with a husband and wife duo making history, The War and Treaty. Michael and Tanya Trotter are going into this year's ceremony as the first Black duo ever nominated in the Duo of the Year category.
Their music encompasses all of those Southern sounds we love. Gospel, rock, and soul, and they've become really popular not only in Nashville, but across the country.
And that's your look into this year's ACMs on the watch list. We'll be right back.
welcome back. It's time for What's Last on our list, and I have some sad news to report. A part of our nation's history may be going extinct. A moment of silence. From the Washington Post, food storage synonyms Tupperware has substantial doubt it can survive.
I'm shocked. I just assumed it would stay fresh forever.
Yeah, Jimmy, when was the last time you actually bought Tupperware, like the real stuff?
Okay, well, that would imply that I was invited to a Tupperware party, and let me think. None. Never once invited.
Well, some experts say the very thing that made it popular, those Tupperware parties, may have been its demise.
Oh, come on, a party where an acquaintance invites you and you feel pressure to buy resealable food containers? That sounds like a blast. But the Jell-O shots always had lids. That was cool.
Those weren't really for Jell-O shots. But there was a time, I will say, the Tupperware parties were the hottest ticket in town and solidified its place in pop culture.
Okay, well, I am sad for Tupperware, but the name will live on forever. I mean, how many people out there have a Tupperware drawer, even if it doesn't have any actual Tupperware in it?
Yes, so famous for its actual name, kind of like Kleenex. And that makes me realize I might need a Kleenex to mourn the loss of Tupperware.
It's actually called facial tissue, but go on.
Yeah. And that's what's last on our list. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Tomorrow on the list, find the hidden treasures at garage sales.
Objects do not have to be signed to be valuable.
Plus, celebrate Mother's Day with a delicious New Orleans classic.
This is the easiest thing we're preparing today.
Okay.
And how Bridgerton changed the fashion trends.
Look how cute this is. It's adorable.
Tomorrow on the list.